This video is sponsored by the Troll Trader. This year at Adepticon, I picked up some minis for a little war game called Dropfleet Commander. I'm a sucker for a good space game because that means I get to paint up some space ships. I got 3 little fleets going of these little spaceships, and I love flying them around my desk and across the tabletop. I've got the regular old humans, the UCM, I got the Scourges, and I got the Shaltari. Scourge and the Shaltari are aliens. This is not all of the factions in the game. I haven't tried all the factions of the game. Until now, I have got all of the battleships for all of the factions, and I want to give them a try. Cracking open the Scourge battleship, this is a big old plastic boat. For the alien invaders of the Dropfleet Commander universe, this kit builds several different vessels. The Demon, Dragon, Nephilim, Beelzebub. These are names the humans gave these ships. Each have some different arms and armaments, so I need to think about what loadout will best serve my fleet and help me out on the tabletop. Or I could just pick the coolest one. Also, this kit doesn't just build battleships, it builds super battleships. Snipping out the parts, I feel like working in this scale is a little bit easier. Since things are huge, I don't feel like I need to get everything as perfect as if I was just building a little guy. I use super glue to speed up the building process, pressing all the parts together. The Scourge remind me a little bit of Klingon ships, although they're more Borgy in lore. One battleship all put together, now for painting, and I really like the glittery pink and green of the box art style. I started out spraying the entire model in 2 coats of silver paint. This gives me a nice chromey look, and to start laying down some color, I took some transparent pink speed paint and sprayed this over all the silver to tint it. I made the body in pink and then switched to a green, and I put this over all the wings. It took a few coats to get it as saturated as I wanted, and now I did a dry brushing of my original silver to bring out all the little raised edges and details. Now the ship is kind of close to being done. It's time for the details, and to start out, I want those big plasma guns to look extra special. I took this animal scale stencil and held it over the guns, spilling over the wings, and I sprayed it with the TT Combat Magenta paint. This left me with a nice pattern of dots close together by the guns and then falling off as they traveled up the wings. While I had this paint in my brush, I also sprayed it over the body to bump up the saturation. And then I took some white ink in my airbrush and sprayed this over the glowing plasma coils. Then I took a neon green and I sprayed this over the white ink to get the color of the glow I wanted. And speaking of colors, I want to protect the colors I've got on there, so I hit the whole ship with a satin varnish. To get some darker shadows into the recesses without tinting the armor darker, I put a black panel liner all over the entire ship. This settles into all the cracks and I can wipe it off the raised areas. I glazed some green speed paint onto the plasma coils, and now it's time to pick out every little dot with some red paint. These are eyes, and this ship has a lot of them. I really like the striking colors of the Scourge vessels, and they're really easy to paint. Now the ship is done, it needs to be mounted. Dropfleet Commander ships come with these bases that have facing markers on them, and I think they look their best with a little paint flown into the cracks. For the Scourge, I'm putting some bright green into these. I took a paper towel with some alcohol on it and wiped the base clean, leaving that paint in the recesses and then stuck in the flying stand. Now for the ship, and before I forget, I hit the ship with a satin varnish. That panel liner dries matte, and so I want to make sure this ship is nice and glossy to really show off the metallics. I glued in the little flight stand peg and then stuck it all together, and one more ship added to the fleet. The Scourge battleship, about as dark and sinister as pink can look. I've built mine as the Faust super battleship, a very worthy flagship to my Scourge fleet. The Scourge are a parasitic alien species at war with humanity in the world of Dropfleet Commander. If anybody was a fan of the book series Animorphs growing up, think the Yeerks from that series. But a lot of the Scourge that humanity is currently warring against were once human, to make the battles that much more depressing. It's easy to spot a Scourge ship in Dropfleet Commander. They have a very specific design philosophy full of elegant curves and a sticky complexion. These guys are the bad guys. The faction that I have really taken a liking to is the good guys, the humans. The UCM ships are very different from the Scourge. They're a mixture of modern stealth aircraft and satellites. This box also has a lot of fun options for what to build. I know from playing a few games against Sean, I need some fighters and bomber support, so I'll need something with some cargo space. And you know what else has what I need? All the used miniatures available from Troll Trader. Troll Trader is one of the biggest suppliers of secondhand Warhammer. They have everything from individual models, squads, or entire armies. Everywhere from on sprue to pre-painted and ready for gaming. Their selection is wide-ranging and growing every day. If there's something you're looking for, you can probably find it. Maybe you're looking for something new and exciting, then I highly recommend taking a look at Troll Trader's army deals. One click, whole army, no fuss. They have one of the biggest varieties of old Warhammer figures I've ever seen, from classic Necrons to retro orcs, even the beloved OG Tactical Squad. I've been a Troll Trader customer for years. On there, I managed to snag these 2 old school tanks, a Predator and a Whirlwind. It's not easy to find these out of production kits, but the Troll Trader came through for me. And they don't just have Warhammer 40k, Troll Trader offers a huge variety from Sigmar, Old World, and other miniature games like Infinity 2. If your pile of shame is feeling extra shameful lately, or you'd like to make some cash, then email them what you'd like to offer up and get a quote today for cash or even credit towards some more exciting minis. And if you're into some Dropfleet Commander yourself, you could even get some boosted credit to use on the TT Combat web store. Head to the link in the description to check out the Troll Trader and get started selling and buying all the secondhand Warhammer you could ever want today. The UCM ships look like flying skyscrapers. They're a little bit Empire from Star Wars, but not evil, just a very militarized coalition of human colonies united in their war against the Scourge, and everybody else. The human ships have guns that actually look like guns. I got to pose these cannons sticking out the top. In the past, I've been painting my UCM up with gray paint, but I have a different idea I want to try out. I started out with a black prime, and then I sprayed a light gray over everything. This didn't end up too bright because covering over black, but that's okay because I'm gonna brighten it up with a heavy dry brushing of a light cold gray. There is a ton of texture on this ship and it took dry brushing beautifully. Now my ship is looking ghostly, I want to apply some color. I thinned down a black speed paint and I glazed this over the majority of the ship, keeping it off the hangar doors and a few key armor panels in the engines. This darkens my ship to that stealthy steel gray that I like the look of, but gives me a lot more visual interest than just gray. I picked out the humongous engine with some silver paint and I put this onto the barrels of the cannons. Then I put a black wash over the hangar doors, the engines, and the cannon barrels. Now to get back to those armor panels I left unpainted. They do look pretty good as just gray, but I hit these with a few coats of white paint to give me a strong accent. Then I took my original light blue-gray color and I did a light dusting of dry brushing to reinforce some of the edges and details. And speaking of details, the front of the ship has a giant torpedo, bigger than some ships in the game. I picked this out with some silver paint and then painted the tip in a few coats of red paint, highlighting it to a dangerous razor-sharp point. That's a nice, sharp, clean human battleship, the pinnacle of earthly technology, now for its base. I hit the flying stand with some white paint, matching the accent of the ship itself. And after a little rubbing with some alcohol, the lines were looking crisp. After a satin varnish, my ship was ready for the flight stand peg to be inserted and for my space boat to stand. The UCM battleship is now complete. I've built the New York. The UCM ships are named after locations from Earth. I got the San Francisco over here. And UCM stands for the United Colonies of Mankind. In the world of Dropfleet Commander, humanity is unified in its efforts to retake a lot of the lost territory to the Scourge invasion, and just to be ready to fight against all of the different alien threats and the other human threats as well. Everything is very militarized, and their vessels are just super tough utilitarian ships, just bulkheads on top of bulkheads on top of bulkheads. I really like the UCM ships because unlike most of the other factions that have some kind of a sci-fi magic technology that adds an elegance to their designs, these ships are just big ol' hunks of steel, just massive tonnage with guns bolted to every possible inch. The UCM are the preeminent human faction in the game, but there are plenty more alien factions. This wonky coral-looking thing is an alien ship from the most technologically advanced species, the Shaltari. Nothing else from the game looks anything like these guys. Their ships are covered in a geometric texture that is extremely striking. And to keep that going on the color scheme, to start out I blasted the Mini with a white primer. Then I started out spraying a bright vibrant yellow over the middle of the ship. Then I took an orangey red and sprayed this on the back half and the front, leaving a stripy yellow in the middle. I dusted on a little more orange in the middle, spraying it at an angle to cover some more of the yellow, and then I switched to a brush. I dry brushed the whole model with a yellow paint to hit on all the little raised edges and details, and to further enhance those details, I made up an orangey wash, thinning it down a lot with some speed paint medium. I glazed this all over to add some definition and shade to the recesses, and to further recess shade, I took a darker red speed paint and I glazed this into key areas and I used speed paint medium to feather it out. I did one final dry brushing of yellow to bring back some of the details, and then the only thing left was picking out the bits. I painted the cockpits, or I guess command bridges, with some lime green paint, and I switched to a darker blue-green and I painted this on all the little balls all over the ship, finishing these off with a tiny drop of lime green to make these shine like little jewels. I glazed my darker blue onto the recesses of the command bridge, and then the only thing left was the big old gun. I base coated this in a light gray and then gave it a couple coats of silver paint. Then I gave the gun a black wash to shade all the recesses and bring out the details, and then I hit it with a dry brushing of silver. There's some extreme contrast between the almost glowing orange and the metal gun. I hit the ship with a satin varnish and then got its base ready. For the Shaltari, I had to go with orange for the lines in the base. I put my guy all together, and now I have my Shaltari flagship ready for the tabletop. The Shaltari Battlecruiser. I have built the copper variant. The Shaltari are a small, hedgehog-like alien species that was initially very friendly with humanity. Now that relationship is a little bit strained. Sometimes they work together, sometimes they don't. They both don't like the Scourge, so that helps, but other than that, they're not to be trusted. In Dropfleet Commander, the Shaltari are the most technologically advanced faction, with their tech being akin to magic. They have the very best of everything, but there's not that many of them, so they have to pick and choose their battles. In terms of painting these suckers, I really like them. There's nothing else that looks quite like this, with their vehicles looking kind of like coral, like underwater coral with the bright orange color and just the weird symmetrical texture that covers all of their stuff. Really funky to paint. The Shaltari are another alien faction in Dropfleet Commander. There are other human factions, like the PHR. Although human is not debatable, but it is questionable. The PHR are the Posthuman Republic. They separated from humanity and using alien guidance have made technological leaps and bounds. Their ships have these large smooth armor panels that are incredibly sleek. When I sandwiched the two halves together, there was a little gap and I used some Tamiya plastic putty to fill this in, using sanding twigs to smooth it out. Gluing on the weapon system and the swept back wings in the back, this ship looks like a space whale. It's a very natural look. The most important thing for these PHR ships is to get that armor perfectly clean and bright, so I started off with a white prime. Once that was on there, I sprayed it down with an off-white creamy color. Then I sprayed along the middle with a reddish brown, letting it dust onto the armor, creating a gradient of dark to light. And to make the contrast more exaggerated, I sprayed a little white ink over the forehead of the ship. To protect this gradient on the armor, I sprayed down all the parts with a satin varnish, then got to work on everything else. I painted all the in-between parts with some gunmetal paint, and it was pretty tricky to get this base coated where it needed to go and avoiding the armor, but eventually I got it in all the right spots. Then I gave all these areas a black wash. Once that was dry, I took some bright silver paint and mixed in some saturated bright blue to tint it a little and then dry brushed this all over the metal, giving it a slightly cold look that'll stand out next to the warm, creamy armor. Now to add a little bit more coldness to the paint job, I picked out all the little hexagons on the wings with some bright saturated blue, and then a little dash of light blue on the top of each shape. I did the same thing to all the little missile pods, a base coat of blue, and then a little dot of light blue. Now the paint job is done. I had to work in sub-assemblies to get it all perfect. I pulled the poster putty out of the glue spots and then attached my wings. It looks so good all together. I hit it with a satin varnish and then got the base finished, putting some blue paint into the firing angles, wiping it clean and then attaching my flight peg and assembling my space whale. The PHR battleship, I have built the Trahan. In Dropfleet Commander, the PHR stands for the Posthuman Republic, and they're just that, the post-humans. In the history of Dropfleet, humanity diverged, one half kind of remaining normal, and then the other half basically becoming this universe's version of elves. Incredibly smart, incredibly strong, incredibly advanced compared to the rest of humanity, the PHR is able to psychically communicate with each other and their technology, and their technology is a cut above. This cream-colored armor is some sort of a non-metallic component that is way stronger than what the rest of humanity has got. And it makes their ships incredibly hard to paint. It is hard to get all of the paint where it needs to go while keeping that armor as clean and perfect as possible, but it does make for an incredibly striking look. I feel like this faction is a lot like the Tyranids from 40k. You just pick two colors, you put it on there, and no matter what, it's gonna look pretty good. The Posthuman Republic relies on their advanced technology, but there's another faction in Dropfleet Commander that also relies, or basically just is, technology. The Bioficers. This isn't a battleship, this is a dreadnought, an even bigger ship. The Bioficers are master artificers of both biology and technology, and their ships have a very different look to the other factions. Instead of sleek angles or spaceship-shaped vessels, they're made up of computer chips and solar panels seemingly haphazardly stuck together. There is a lot of modularity with the Bioficers. There's all these extra solar panels that you can glue on all over the ship. With the dreadnought all together, I started out giving the model a black prime. The ship is very abstract, so I took a few coats to get the paint into every nook and cranny. Then I base coated the whole thing in a dark red paint. Once that was on there, I wanted to give the model a black wash, but to make this much easier than getting a brush everywhere, I put the wash into my airbrush and hosed down the model. Once that was dry, I broke out my dry brush and started to put some bright saturated red on. This stuck on all the lovely raised textures all over the Mini, and after a coat of red paint, I switched to an orangey red paint and dry brushed this over the top parts. Once I got the red everywhere, I started picking out all the little battery-shaped bits with some gold paint. This adds a nice pop of color to the dark red hull of the ship. And speaking of a pop of color, I mixed some green paint into black and base coated all the triangular solar panels all over the ship. There are a lot, and once they were all base coated, I took my dry brush with a blue-green color and I carefully dry brushed the top of each solar panel, making a subtle gradient and edge highlighting on all the panels. Now the only thing left is the giant gun. This is basically a Tesla gun, the Giga Light Vice. To make it look glowing, I started out spraying some white ink over the electrodes, and then I went over these again with a light blue. After those base coats and object source lighting, I sprayed on some transparent blue speed paint, and then dry brushed the coils with white paint to make them look very bright. Now the ship is done and ready to be mounted. The only thing that would make sense is red for the firing lines. I got the ship all nice and standing, and my first dreadnought is done. The Bioficer Dreadnought. The Bioficers are the newest faction in Dropfleet Commander. They are an alien species that is perfect at tech crafting and flesh crafting. Their technology has a really weird look. It almost looks like the entire vehicle has 3D printed itself, and then these solar panel arrays have just erupted where needed. The Bioficers, they're pretty secretive and not much is known about them, but what is known is they are incredibly aggressive and they love war. The Bioficer ships don't have a lot of broadside or backup weapons. They just have really, really big guns pointed directly in front of them. I guess their theory is if they can destroy the enemy fleet in one powerful barrage, they don't need to mess around with any other types of weapons. These guys are incredibly scary, but one faction that is not very scary at all are the plucky Resistance. The Resistance are the ragtag human survivors of the first Scourge invasion, fighting to reclaim their homeworlds, using whatever ship and vehicle and weapons they can get their hands on to mount a resistance. The ship has a cool two-body design. If I wasn't building the grand battleship, I could actually build 2 old battleships out of this one box. Once it was all together, I hit the whole ship with a white prime, and I want to give this a very different look to the UCM ships in my collection, and I really like the box art paint scheme. And you know what else has a great box art? Our website. On EonsOfBattle.com, we have all kinds of great hobby goodies, dirty down products, sanding twigs, dry brushes, green stuff, wet palettes, paints, and more. And we have terrain. It's the best way to support us doing what we do by getting a membership. Each month, members get a credit good for any one terrain pack we have ever made or the brand new one. Our new terrain for November, the Crashed Landers. These spaceships have all the trappings of grimdark futuristic flyers who have met their untimely end, dropping out of the sky to live out their days as dramatic terrain. With weapons, engines, armor, and rivets, these corpses were carrying some precious cargo that never made it to its destination. These ill-fated vehicles were designed by us and are available at EonsOfBattle.com. After the white prime, I hit the whole ship with a cold light gray, and then I put some gray speed paint into my airbrush and sprayed this on from underneath to darken and dirty up the crispy white paint job. And speaking of crispy, I painted the front of the hull with some hot orange paint, doing a few coats to get it nice and smooth. I also painted this color around the engines and the command bridge. On the engines, I base coated these with a gold paint. Now the Resistance is old and I want to give it some markings. I grabbed a Leagues of Votan transfer decal sheet for my collection. These have a nice sci-fi feel to them, and I put some 42s on the noses, a random chain of letters on the sides, and a few more 4s on the rear intakes. Now the ship is pristine, but I want it to be extremely worn out, so I started out sponging some white paint all over for paint chips. Then I did a dry brushing of white paint to make the paint look weathered and worn. Then for battle damage, I did another all over sponging of a dark brown paint. I tried to be very light with the sponging, so it left very small little marks all over. Then I took a brush and connected some of these paint chips together to make larger scratches, running along the corners like a messy edge highlight. Then I took a black contrast paint and flooded this into all the techie sections of the ship. Now onto the weapons. This ship has some very old school weapons, no fancy Tesla guns, just modern looking ship cannons and lots of them. With everything base coated, I sprayed it all down with a satin varnish in preparation for a secret weapon. Dark brown panel liner. I put this all over everything, turning the ship a dark black. And then I came in with a lot of makeup wedges, soaked in odorless spirits, and I started cleaning it up, wiping it to get as much off as I could, from the raised areas and leaving it behind in the recesses. This made it look 100 times more real, and it wasn't too hard to do. After the panel liner had dried, I stuck on the guns, posing them pointing out, and I put on the cannon arrays. Now my little battleship that could is ready for action. I made it a flying stand, putting yellow for the markings, and sticking on its little clear flying stand foot, and putting it all together. The Resistance Battleship, Grand Battleship. This configuration is known as the Nelson, and it is by far the most military looking of the Resistance vessels. This thing looks like a proper warship. Most of the Resistance fleet Looks kind of like tugboats that have been press-ganged into military service, with guns just kind of bolted wherever they'll fit. There are a lot of similarities between the UCM ships and the Resistance ships because they're both the regular old humans, but the UCM looks really, really good in a nice stealthy black cool paint job. The Resistance looks its best, I think, when it's in nice bright hopeful colors, then covered in 3 layers of grime. Now that I have painted up at least one ship of every single faction in the game, I don't know which one I enjoy the most. I thought there would be a front runner, and it might be Shaltari because that bright orange is really calling me, but there was a little something to love about all of them. I feel like with the Bioficers, I could paint up an entire fleet in about a day, and the PHR ships are incredibly striking. I almost don't want to touch this and get like my dirty fingerprints all over that pristine hull. I do own a lot of Scourge and a lot of UCM, although the Resistance is now calling out to me now that I've painted up some of it. I think I might just have to keep collecting a little bit of everything. Let me know in the comments below which faction speaks to you, and now that I've painted up a lot of Dropfleet Commander, I might have to dip my toes into the other game, Drop Zone Commander. That one's on the ground. Thanks for watching.